to a new episode of Agents of Change. Today, we're going to talk about a very special topic that has not been given enough attention when discussing development strategies. It's a pleasure to welcome Matt Warner, president of Atlas Network and co-author of the new book, Development with Dignity, Self-Determination, Localization, and the End of Poverty. Thank you for joining us, Matt.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to being here and speaking with you.
To begin, could you help us understand what is the connection between human dignity and successful development?
Well, if you go back a couple hundred years, we didn't always think of dignity the way we think of it today. We thought of it as describing rank or class or status in society. And then something important happened where we started to reconsider this idea of human dignity as something universal, something that represents equal moral worth for everyone. And just as importantly, the presumption that everybody should be able to make choices about their own lives, that each of us has knowledge about ourselves that others don't have, and that knowledge should be honored and given the respect of individual freedom, that no one should tell us what we should do with our lives. And so there's a practical benefit to this shift that happened in the way we think about dignity in terms of economic development, because to achieve innovation and wealth creation, what you ideally want is a decentralized experimental landscape where everybody is free to try different things in pursuit of bettering their own lives, and then learning from each other quickly and pivoting to what's working so that we can, in a sort of an evolutionary process in the market, discover what is really viable and of value to society. And so when we start with a presumption of human dignity, that each person should be free to lead their own lives and make choices about their lives, and respecting them for that, that there's something that they know that we don't. Even, the greatest economist or expert is limited in what they know when it comes to what each person sees in their lives, what trade-offs they face. And so this kind of decentralized landscape of experimentation and freedom that is so conducive to wealth creation and shared prosperity, if you start with a presumption of human dignity, you're on the right track to being able to build the institutions that protect that.
Okay. Well, thank you for that introduction. So could you tell us how is this book connecting to mainstream debates in economic development practice?
Sure. Well, there are a couple of key themes that are top of mind for the broader global economic development community and foreign aid in particular. One is a desire to get a better grasp of what the idea of human dignity means. We've been using the term the last 100 years. If you look at the UN Declaration on Human Rights in 1948, it talks about human dignity. The term is used a lot today, and people appropriately are starting to say, well, do we know what we mean when we say that? And what implication does that have on whether we are living up to, in the execution of aid projects and development projects, respecting the dignity of the individuals we're trying to serve? And if too much of what we're doing is outsider-led, our own design of what other people's communities and economies should look like, then we're really kind of falling down on the first principle of respecting the dignity of others, particularly those that will succeed or fail as a function of the institutional changes that we want to see in their communities. And so if those of us on the outside are in charge of those things and not subject to the consequences, then that's really a disservice. And that there's something useful and special about, in a democratic way, what those individuals can bring to the deliberative process of discovering change and strengthening their institutions that would make them more enduring and more likely to succeed. And so that's one piece. And then the other related but different question is this idea of decolonizing aid and achieving localization. And so both of those are related to becoming more introspective about our role as outsiders and being a little bit more humble about being so gung-ho about going around the world and telling other people what they need to succeed. The idea of decolonizing aid is saying, yes, you may not be trying to, in an imperialist way, run our country, but you're still using your money and other resources to have an outsized influence. And in practical terms, it's not it's not that that influence is achieving something better. It's not. It's not effective. There's something that outsiders are at a disadvantage of. And so the practical strategy then is referred to as localization. How do we, as outsiders, whether it's USAID, the UN, the World Bank, how do we support local organizations who have their own vision for change, who understand their communities and their history and their culture, and have ideas about what's important and what's worth achieving, and coming alongside and behind those organizations and supporting their success. The new head of USAID, Samantha Power, in the US, has called for increasing the proportion of USAID funds that go directly to local organizations from 6% to 25% over the next 4 years, and then 50% over 10 years. Rhetorically, I think that's the right way to go. That's encouraging. I'm a little bit skeptical that they'll actually be able to do it and do it right. What we've seen to date has been, in particular in Central America, with USAID investment in, as Kamala Harris talked about, getting at the root causes of migration. You end up with these sort of very politically motivated priorities, and then the design of how to go about learning, what those root causes are, et cetera, is still a very much a foreign-led enterprise. And USAID did a large contract to an international organization, and then tasked them with finding local organizations in Central America that they could then try to achieve that target. Well, in development, if you really want to take localization seriously for the right reasons, then it's not just about making sure that local organizations are getting money. It's about who is leading development, who's in charge, whose ideas are really influencing design. And so what you saw in Central America is that many of the local organizations said, look, we don't think that what you're tasking us to do is a priority, is worthwhile. They just didn't buy into it. And so they balked at sort of participating in this very superficial idea of localization. So what our book tries to say is there is a way to do localization, but as an outsider, what you first have to do is listen and learn. Get to know local organizations, local civil society actors in other countries, learn from them what the challenges are according to how they see them, and what solutions they think are worth pursuing, and then come behind and support what they're doing. Don't come in and tell them what they ought to be doing.
Okay, well, that's a major shift in the perspective about how to think about international development. In your book, you share stories of think tank successes in strengthening the dignity that institutions afford individuals. What role do you see for think tanks in leading development in the 21st century?
Well, so as we acknowledge in the book, both Tom and I have a particular bias when it comes to think tanks, because that's been our experience and our work. And so we've spent so much of our own professional lives learning from and supporting think tanks around the world. And so we have a strong view of the potential and the role that think tanks can play. Although we also say in the book, think tanks are not the only civil society actor that is sort of key to development, but it is the one that we know best. And so the other thing that we point out is the number and the quality of think tanks around the world has exploded in the last couple of decades. It's really become a very sort of strong phenomenon that people should be paying attention to, what think tanks can do, and the unique role that they play, because they go deep on ideas in local context. They do the research. They have the sort of empiricism around what they're doing, but they're also independent, or at least the ones that we prioritize are independent. They're not beholden to government. They're not beholden to one corporation that they work for. they have a true sort of independent voice, and I think that's critical. And so we've also agreed with others who've started to look at think tanks as an undervalued resource in development, meaning if you want to see results and resources used effectively, looking at what think tanks can do and supporting their vision for change is really important, because there's lots of ways to approach the problem of poverty, and most of those have a role to play. But the unique role that think tanks can play is they're not just looking at needs that people face, but what are the institutional changes that are going to change the game for everybody. And that is a high leverage strategy for solving long-term questions around economic progress. And so we not only tell the stories of some successful think tanks, but we make the point that there's a lot more potential there as think tanks get better and better and grow in their own capacity in different parts of the world.
Finally, this book also has a message for philanthropists working to solve poverty. What is that message, Matt?
So I think the trend of localization, at least in rhetoric, is probably creating some confusion for large philanthropies. One of the things that you start to wonder is, okay, well, if outsiders should be coming in and supporting from behind what local actors are doing, does that mean that we shouldn't be holding them accountable? Well, of course you should hold them accountable, but not according to your own pre-designed idea about what success is. And so there are a couple of important aspects to localization that we encourage philanthropists who care about this outsider's dilemma, this problem of trying to do good, but if coming from the outside, perhaps making things worse or just not being effective because we're outsiders. So one is learn what the priorities are from prospective grantees, learn how they would approach tackling those priorities, and then ask them to define in measurable and clear and tangible ways what success would be. And then you can support what they have put together as a project with clearly defined outcomes. But make sure that you're not overwhelming them with your predetermined award amounts. You've got to really learn what is going to support the capacity building of that organization. Don't just invest in a project. Invest in the long-term capacity building of that organization. And sometimes what that means is you want to be not just paying for one big project that may be 80% of that grantee's income. You want to support projects in smaller ways that then can invite a diversity of funding sources so that the strength of the organization increases as a result of your involvement. And then lastly, do hold them accountable. They provided definitions of success, so have them report on what they achieved, and some combination of achieving actual results and learning from where they fell short and demonstrating that learning and how they're going to do things differently is actually of great long-term service to the health of the grantee. And so accountability is still important, but you've also got to start from a place of humility as a philanthropist and an outsider, and recognize that the reason you're supporting these organizations is because they're in the position to do something that you on your own can't do. And so a combination of humility, listening, and accountability, I think is the right way to approach the very important aim of localization.
Well, thank you again, Matt, for joining us and for helping to shed light on the importance of human dignity and its relationship to development. We are confident that the book will have a great impact, and we invite all who listen to us to read it. Okay, thanks again.
Thank you, Luis.